colonialism should have passed and people should have self-determination. Palestinians don't have it, in fact, and the United States is the main reason for which the Palestinians are suffering in this way. Benjamin Netanyahu and the extremists on his cabinet will find a way to go back to war, and they've done this before. Those gangs were Israeli-backed and were seen by the Israelis as alternatives to Hamas.
How do we know this, Professor? We're talking about a potential peace in the Middle East with our next guest, Juan Cole. He is the professor of history at the University of Michigan and also the editor-in-chief of Informed Comment. Will the ceasefire in Gaza last? We'll find out. Professor, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Likewise, David.
Professor Cole, let's walk through what happened in the last week. There was a ceasefire brokered. Both sides, Israel and Hamas, agreed to exchange the bodies of hostages. What's happened up until now? Let's just give a recap to our audience, then we can discuss what may happen next.
Sure. Well, this horrible situation in Israel and Palestine has been going on now for 2 years with Israeli bombardment of Gaza very intensively, the destruction of over 80% of the buildings, or the damage or destruction of 80% of the buildings, and the damage to the infrastructure. A blockade since April on food and medical aid entering the Gaza Strip, and a great deal of suffering. The United Nations declared it a famine. It also has been widely viewed as a genocide. And I think U.S. presidents could have stopped it at any moment because Israel is deeply dependent on the United States for resupply of ammunitions and munitions. And the U.S. was, in essence, a silent partner in this war. For reasons that are, of course, a little murky because they're private, Trump and his close associates decided that the time had come to end this thing. I think it could have been ended long before. I think you had an opportunity in the Biden administration a year ago to end it. I personally think that the obstacle to ending it had been the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the extremists on his cabinet who hadn't achieved their maximalist goals. Netanyahu himself, I think, is a little afraid of going out of office and going to jail. He's under indictment for corruption. And the war was one way to keep himself in the catbird seat. But for various reasons, Trump grew dissatisfied with this situation, with Netanyahu dragging his feet all the time. He's alleged to have said, "I don't know why you're negative. This is this peace deal is a win for you. Take it."
Let's take a look at or listen to what Trump has said in a press briefing on this subject, and we'll respond together. Take a listen, Professor.
Gaza, how long will it take Hamas to disarm, and can you guarantee that is going to happen?
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm, and if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
How will you do that?
I don't have to explain that to you, but if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games, okay? Now, we did something monumental. We got the hostages back. That was the first thing we had to do, above all else, get the hostages back. Now, they misrepresented because we were told they had 26, 24 of dead hostages, if we can use those terms. And it seems as though they don't have that because we're talking about a much lesser number. But that's a very tough subject. I want them back. That's what they said. I want them back. Also, they said they were going to disarm. And initially speaking, they did take out a couple of gangs that were very bad, very, very bad gangs, and they did take them out, and they killed a number of gang members. And that didn't bother me much, to be honest with you. That's okay. It's a couple of very bad gangs. It's no different than other countries, like Venezuela sent.
Okay, and then he's talking about other things. So let's just unpack what he said there. If Hamas doesn't disarm, we'll disarm for them. Is it truly the role of the U.S. military to disarming combatant groups in the Middle East, though, right now, is the bigger question.
Well, there were many misrepresentations in what Trump said, and some puzzles. Hamas actually, to my knowledge, has not agreed to disarm. What they agreed to was that they would not be the government of Gaza going forward, and they would not be in the government of Gaza going forward. So they're accepting stepping down from a rulership role. But their spokespeople have repeatedly said they wouldn't disarm. They have come into conflict as the Israeli troops have withdrawn from about 45% of Gaza. They've come into conflict with gangs that had formed, which were preying on people. Those gangs were Israeli-backed and were seen by the Israelis as alternatives to Hamas.
How do we know this, Professor?
Oh, it's been widely reported. I mean, there isn't any question about it. That Trump approves of Hamas destroying these Israeli-backed gangs is odd. I mean, certainly not what the Israeli cabinet would have said about it. But the U.S. doesn't have troops in Gaza. It's not going to have troops in Gaza, in my view, and it's not in a position to disarm anybody in Gaza. And Gaza is in chaos. When a government and a military has been made to collapse, as we saw in Iraq earlier in this century, the country falls into chaos. Even in Iraq, we had 170,000 U.S. troops, and they still couldn't disarm people. This kind of posturing that Trump does, that he's in control and he'll make things happen. I mean, the reporter was quite right to ask him, how are you going to do that? And he refused. He refused to answer the question because there isn't an answer.
Okay. It seems like maybe you're referring to this story here, and as some others reported. Israel confirms it's arming Hamas rivals. An operation opposition calls complete madness, and also reported by Al Jazeera that in June, apparently Israeli officials admitted to arming gangs in Gaza, some of which have ties to ISIS in an effort to destabilize Hamas. Now, right now, regardless of who's arming these groups, Trump wants an end to this violence, and he's even wrote on Truth Social that if this violence doesn't end, if Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. Thank you for your attention to this matter. What do you make of that statement?
Well, aside from bombarding them, which hasn't worked for the Israelis for 2 years, there isn't anything that Trump can do about Hamas. But the real question is, David, who is going to succeed Hamas in governing the Gaza Strip? Because that new authority, if it's established, would be the authority that could hope to, provide some security and have people disarm. And we don't know the answer to this question. It's been bruited that former British Prime Minister Tony Blair will head an administration of the Gaza Strip. Some people have argued that it should be the Palestine Liberation Organization, which runs the West Bank. Instead, there's talk of an Arab force. Turkey has volunteered to send in forces. But those discussions are wide-ranging and inchoate and without specific issue as we now speak. So we don't know what the future of Gaza is going to be, and the future of the administration of Gaza is going to determine the security situation.
What needs to happen to maintain peace in the region, in that particular region?
Oh, the Palestinians need to have a state. All of these conflicts that we see in the Levant are about Palestinian statelessness. People in the West don't understand what's going on there, and they don't understand that the Palestinians are under Israeli military occupation. Nobody in North America would put up with that. I mean, if you had some foreign country running a province or a state in North America, people would pick up guns and fight it off. This is not going to stop until the Palestinians have the dignity of citizenship, access to courts that can guarantee their rights and then their property. Palestinians don't even know what they own because the Israelis can steal it from them at any moment.
Before we jump back into the video, let's talk about something most people ignore: online privacy. Now, your personal information isn't just sitting on your phone or email. It's being scraped, bought, and sold by data broker websites every day without your permission. Our sponsor today, Delete Me, helps you take that control back. They scan the internet for your exposed information, send you regular privacy reports, and remove your data from hundreds of broker sites so it can't be used against you. Take mine, for example. In the latest report, they reviewed over 325 listings to see if any data brokers had my personal information, and they continue to check every week to ensure that it stays off. Go to joindeleteme.com/DavidLin and use the promo code DavidLin at checkout, link down below, or scan the QR code here on the screen, and you'll get 20% off of all US plans. Take control of your privacy today before somebody else does. Palestinians are recognized as a state by, I believe, 157 countries around the world already, Professor. So if I were just to take the opposite side of this discussion, I would say it's not the recognition that ends. Clearly, they're recognized by the majority of the world. It's a matter of practice. What in practice needs to happen for conflict and violence to end?
Well, those recognitions are pro forma. They're just on paper. The fact is, if you lived in West Bank or Gaza, which are the Palestinian territories with Palestinian majorities, there are 5 or 6 million people living there. You're in your everyday life. It's the Israeli military who tells you what to do. There's Israeli troops patrolling. In fact, there are Israeli squatters who came over from Israel, stole Palestinian land, made settlements on them, and then send out militias to attack neighboring Palestinian villages every day, often with the complicity of the Israeli military. So there isn't a state. If you're a Palestinian and an Israeli settler attacks you, to which Palestinian court could you go for relief? There isn't one. About 40% of the West Bank is such that the PLO has police, but they're essentially forced to be hand in glove with the Israeli military. So there isn't any Palestinian state. It's an occupation regime. It's not any different from British India, where there was no Indian government. It was the British that ran India for 200 years. It's a colonial situation. And the world agrees that this should not be, that the colonialism should have passed and people should have self-determination. The Palestinians don't have it, in fact, and the United States is the main reason for which the Palestinians are suffering in this way. So you asked me, what would make for peace in the region. We keep seeing these outbreaks of war over the Palestine issue because it's unresolved. If Mr. Trump really wanted to be a tough guy and intervene to make a historic settlement, he could. But that's in my view, what needs to happen is there needs to be a Palestinian state.
All right. And then the other side of the coin here, what would happen to sabotage this peace deal? So this article, for example, highlights some potential scenarios, worst case scenarios, that could end the Gaza peace deal. I'll sum it up here for the audience and yourself. Hamas seeks to retain underground command structures, avoid disarmament. Number 2, Israeli far-right working to block Palestinian statehood. And then number 3, Iran is attempting to maintain regional deterrence by rearming proxy forces like Hezbollah. I'll let you comment on those points, perhaps some other thoughts of your own. What could end this peace deal?
Well, I mean, the peace deal is so open-ended that virtually anything could end it. There's no practical structure for ongoing peace at the moment. We've had an Israeli withdrawal from less than half of the Gaza Strip. which has left chaos in its wake, as might be expected. There's been nothing to replace it. Of course, I mean, to the extent that Hamas still exists, and remember, it's been reduced to a tiny shadow of its former self. I don't think it can assert itself to take back over Gaza, nor do I think its leaders would want to do that. So, yes, all of those spoilers are possibilities. The main one, in my view, is that Benjamin Netanyahu and the extremists on his cabinet will find a way to go back to war, and they've done this before. There was a pause in the fighting in January and February, and in March, Netanyahu just pulled out the stops and went back to war and imposed a food blockade on the Gaza Strip. So, there are people in the Israeli cabinet who would very much like to spoil this deal, and they have the power. Hamas is a non-entity at the moment. Hezbollah is much weakened. Iran is much weakened. I don't think that they're the main players here. I think it's the Israelis. So if the Israeli government wanted to have some kind of accommodation to the Palestinians, then you could have some hope. But there's no sign that that's the way they think.
This is a chart of the oil price, and I think investors and participants in the oil market would like to know from you, Professor, how fragile, generally speaking, is this deal? Because what we saw happened on the 10th of October was oil dropped about 3% on the news, and it's continuing to drop. So I think the market's pricing in that no escalation is going to happen yet. Now, this could all change overnight. So in your calculation of probabilities here, how likely is it that we can get this reversal? In other words, complete end to the deal, back to violence, and then perhaps even escalation, and then oil will go back up?
Well, I think there's a 50-50 chance that the immediate fighting in Gaza has come to a close. In my experience, people fight for as long as they think that the continued fighting might give them some advantage. I suspect that both sides have reached the point where they see that there isn't a continued advantage in the fighting. The kinds of things that would affect the oil markets are that the Houthis in North Yemen have been bombarding tankers and container ships plying the Red Sea, going up and down from the Suez Canal. The Houthis have been pretty. They're wild men, but they've been men of their word to some extent that they won't do that if the Israelis stop attacking Gaza, and they didn't in January and February when there was a temporary pause in the fighting. So that would be good news for the oil markets and for shipping in general, because there are 6 big container ship companies, and then you have some oil going through the Suez Canal, some oil tankers, and a lot of those have had to find alternative routes around the Cape of Good Hope, for instance. It has added expense to shipping, especially from Asia. Back and forth. So should this peace hold, and I'd say 50-50, it will, that Suez Canal, Red Sea shipping lane blockade of the Houthis should subside, and so that would be good. That would be good news for the oil markets and for the container ships as well. The other things that are happening are that Iraq is pumping 4.5 million barrels a day pretty regularly. The Saudis are pumping. Kuwait. There's restrictions on Iran, and that probably keeps the price of oil from collapsing, because if the Iranian oil were not on the black market and not just being smuggled to China, but actually could be freely sold, that would put a lot of extra oil on the market. So, I have to tell you, though, David, that The Palestine and Israel issue is pretty far away from the centers of oil production, and in my experience, hasn't usually dramatically affected them. And I think the markets are overly jittery about struggles in the Levant affecting oil prices. You see them reacting pretty dramatically to these outbreaks of violence between the Israelis and Palestinians, but neither country has oil, and there isn't any oil anywhere nearby. And the big centers are the Persian Gulf, which usually don't get dramatically affected. Although, as I said, there has been this about 10% of energy goes through the Suez Canal, so that has been in effect.
Well, that raises the question as to whether or not matters in the Middle East still matter for oil. Historically, OPEC has been the dominant producer of oil. Now with shale, I mean, not now, but in recent years with shale production, the U.S. has become more or less self-sufficient, at least according to the news. First of all, maybe evaluate whether or not that statement is true. And if it is, then should we even, as oil investors, should oil investors or participants in the oil market react to the Middle East at all?
Well, the Middle East more widely, yes. I mean, because although, as you say, there's a lot of oil production outside the Middle East, the Persian Gulf still, last I knew, had about 22% of production. And oil is a fragile commodity. It's something where people absolutely need it to run their, 70% of it is for transportation. So they need it to run their automobiles and their trucks and for commerce. And so if one country, of the oil producers in the Middle East suffered a strike or some kind of terrorist attack, it would put oil prices way up. I think the Middle East is still very significant for the price of oil. But I don't think that the Palestine-Israel conflict is the thing that would mainly affected. It would be conflicts in the Gulf itself that would have that impact. I think the Trump enormous pressure on Iran is the kind of thing that does affect oil prices, for instance, because Iran can't sell its oil on world markets because of U.S. Sanctions, and so has to smuggle it. Typically, they smuggle it to third countries like Malaysia, and then those countries black market it mainly to China.
There is a broader theory that all of what's happening currently is a proxy war between the U.S. and China, with Iran funding members like Hezbollah that are opposing Israel, and Israel being backed by the U.S., Iran being backed in some ways by China. What's really happening is a proxy war between an existing superpower and an emerging superpower. Just based on history, is there a precedent in history for these things happening on a wider scale?
Oh, well, there's a precedent in history, certainly, for challenger states to emerge as rivals to dominant powers. The Soviet Union was not important in the 20s, whereas the British Empire ruled much of the earth. By the 1950s, the Soviet Union was a superpower, and the British were a small island. So those shifts have occurred. There have been challenges in the past. I don't think that China, the Chinese leadership, is invested in Iran's projects. I think Iran is an inconvenient partner for them. They're afraid of American sanctions, and so don't want to get too openly involved in Iran. And they don't, I think, approve of the violence that Iran has been involved in. I mean, to be fair, the Iranians would configure it as a form of resistance, that they've been under attack and their allies have been under attack. But in any case, the Chinese have this theory of harmonious development, and they hope to make their way into superpower status without getting distracted by these regional conflicts. So, if anything, I don't have any proof of it, but my guess is that the Chinese have told the Iranians to cool it, the big challenge, if you're talking about oil markets, that China poses is not in that regard of geopolitical conflict in the Middle East. It's the Green Revolution in China and the rise of the EV. The Chinese have several important electric vehicle companies, including BYD. They are reducing prices. They're making more and more efficient batteries. It's becoming a bigger and bigger part of the Chinese automotive market, and the likelihood is, Ember and others have made this projection that Chinese oil demand has peaked this year. Because of so many Chinese are driving EVs, they're not importing petroleum to fuel them, and it's likely that they'll import less and less petroleum in the next decade. And if that happens in China, and if the Chinese can roll out this EV industry in other countries as they hope to, that's the big challenge. There's going to be downward pressure on the oil prices coming from the rise of electric vehicles. It won't happen in the United States because of the Trump administration, or it won't happen to the extent that it might have. But in the rest of the world, including Europe, Africa, Latin America, if the Chinese way becomes dominant, then it's really a challenge to the oil markets, and you could see a long-term secular decline in the industry.
To your earlier point about China wanting to become a world superpower without the need of conflict, is that even possible? Isn't it true that history has taught us that an emerging superpower has usually clashed with a rising one?
Well, yes, there have been a lot of situations like that, but actually the Soviet Union is an interesting case where because it emerged at a time after nuclear weapons had been introduced into the world, and because the Soviets got their own nuclear weapons not so long after the United States had them, there wasn't ever a direct war between the United States and the Soviet Union. The two did have severe geopolitical conflicts, but they tended to divert them into third countries. And so the Vietnam War they had these third world proxy wars. And that's the much more likely form that a conflict between the United States and China would take. Not a direct military confrontation, but some sort of proxy war over some over some area or some resource in the global South. But at the moment, the Chinese have resisted taking that kind of bait. I don't mean to configure them as heroic. I think that they have selfish reasons for which they don't want to divert resources to military confrontations, and they have, rattled sabers with Taiwan and with the Philippines, to some extent with Japan. So they're not always necessarily a pleasant adversary to deal with, but pursuing a big war so far has not been their strategy, and I think they are afraid that it would drain resources that are needed if they're to compete with the United States, because by nominal GDP they're still behind, and certainly the amount of poverty in China far exceeds that of places like the United States or Europe. So they're coming from behind, and they need their national resources for things like making themselves an electro-state, for competing in world markets. They don't want to be spending money on munitions.
How much animosity actually is there between China and the U.S.? This rhetoric that we're seeing on an almost daily basis from the government warning about China being belligerents and how they're unreliable partners to the world. I'll show you a quote by Scott Bessent in just a minute. How much of that is just talk from the politicians to, galvanize the population, so to speak? Is there actually, maybe behind closed doors, they're really just partners? I don't know.
I think it's a mixed bag, David. I think there are many areas in which they are partners. They continue to be partners. And I think, you look at the volume of trade between the two countries, and it's just enormous and continuing. And Trump's tariffs will affect it to some extent in some sectors. The Chinese are not buying U.S. soybeans this year. But that's just one commodity. You're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in trade annually. And with regard to some issues, Trump still talks about trying to enlist Chinese aid in resolving the Ukraine conflict, for instance. And it maybe doesn't seem very likely on the outside, but certainly he can use Beijing to send messages. Yes, I mean, it's not the Chinese-U.S. rivalry is there and important, but it's as a person who grew up in the 20th century remembers the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. It's nothing like that. I mean, the Soviet Union and the United States were really toe-to-toe. They had those tanks lined up in Germany, eyeing one another, and there was danger of them going to war at any moment. And they were involved in these very heavy-duty proxy wars like Vietnam. And there was very little trade between the Soviet Union and the United States, a little bit of wheat and maybe some oil and so forth. But it was a tiny market. It's not at all like that. I mean, the Chinese-U.S. relationship is, as you say, much more complex.
Well, this just came in from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, in response to, Trump's 100% tariff announcement on China. China then announced it would stop exporting critical minerals. If China wants to be an unreliable partner to the world, then the world will have to decouple, Bessent said. The world does not want to decouple. We want to de-risk, but signals like this are signs of decoupling, which we don't believe China wants. Could it be possible, Professor, that the Cold War of the future is purely economical? Instead of tanks lining up, on either side of Berlin, we have either side willing to pull the trigger on exporting critical minerals, materials, and what the other trading partner needs, thereby crippling the entire economic bloc of the adversary. Is that what's happening?
I don't think it will go to that extent. The Chinese were clever in developing rare earth mineral extraction and refining before anybody else. What are called rare earth minerals, which are very important to the Green Revolution in energy and transportation, are not actually rare. I mean, that's a term of art. They're everywhere. But nobody else has developed them the way the Chinese have done. And so at the moment, they have a functional monopoly on them. And I think it's a weapon of the weak. When they say, well, look, if you're going to put all these tariffs on us and hurt our economy, we're just not going to share our rare earth minerals, which we now, have this temporary monopoly on. That's a bargaining chip. That's a way of saying you're hurting us, we'll hurt you back. Please back off. But it's in my view, it's a sign of weakness that they have to do something like that. I think people like Bessent and Trump talk a big game about polarization, but we've already discussed that. The amount of trade between the two countries is just enormous. And it would be bad for the United States to polarize economically to that extent.
I'll end on this one final question. You're a professor of history and a student of history. So just looking at the last 50 years, how do you think the world will change in the next 50 years? In other words, if we were to look at the starting point, which is some point in the 70s, and then the end point, which is some point in the 2070s, which is a 100-year span, right? How would that change?
Well, I think the signs are that China will emerge as the major superpower in the world, partially because it's decided to go in big for green energy, and 80% of the solar panels that are bought in the world are bought from China. There's enormous markets for these panels in Africa and Latin America and so forth. The United States is not in that game. I don't know, it's like 2% of the market. And EVs are another place where the Chinese are innovating, where the European auto markets are trembling with terror that the Chinese are just going to move in, and a car means a Chinese car. Because BYD has a $16,000 EV with a pretty good range, and nobody else has anything like that. And if there were actually free trade, already the Chinese would be making enormous inroads in the American market. They're not allowed to sell those things here. So I think that on sort of technological grounds, the Chinese are positioning themselves to be the dominant economic power. They're going to be the first electro state. They're going to be the first advanced electro state. And the Trump administration policies, it seems to me, are in danger of making the United States a much more backward country. He's decimated the scientific establishment just this year. Some 10 to 15% of government scientists have been fired. Those were people who did basic research, who were developing things that turned in later on to products and to sell in the market. So I think the other thing, though, is that because of global heating and climate breakdown, there's going to be a lot of unpredictable changes in the world. There are going to be some places that are going to be very hard to live in, because it's so hot, or it becomes so dry. There's going to be enormous, hundreds of millions of people are going to move. I think Canada, if it continues to welcome immigration, has the potential to become a very big and important country, because it's going to have a much more temperate climate. And there are going to be enormous opportunities for immigration and development. I think the Canadians sometimes don't appreciate their own weight in the world, but it could emerge as a very major player.
Or the 51st state, one of the two. We'll see. Thank you very much,
Could go the other way around.
I don't see that happening. One could theorize. Excellent. Thank you very much. Where can we learn from you, perhaps follow you and read your work?
Yeah. So I have a blog, Informed Comment. And my name is Juan Cole, Juancole. If you just Google either one, it'll come right up.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Cole. We'll speak again soon, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Juan Cole in the links down below.